So Dr. Himanshu, Director, IIM-Indore, welcome to ETGovernment. 2021 year considered to be very significant for IIM-Indore. Can you share some of your milestones you achieved, some of the unaccomplished tasks that you have in mind 2021, if you can share?
We are doing a lot for the city, we are doing a lot for the country, and we are trying to play our role in terms of nation building. And coming to things that we would like to do in the future, Radha, there was this project of ours, which was to expand the campus because we need some more hostels, we need some more faculty houses, we need some more classrooms. And what we intend to do is to have world-class classrooms. And therefore, we had embarked upon a project which is estimated at about 230 crores. So that got delayed because of the COVID pandemic. But I'm delighted to share that the architectural drawings are going to be finalized within a week or so. And this year, towards mid of the year, we are going to start the groundwork as well. So this is so far as IIM-Indore plans to do. IIM-Indore wants to, plans to, and intends to become one of the top management institutions in the world.
What has been experience of IIM-Indore? And can you highlight some of the best practices that you followed?
I would divide them into three categories.
Okay.
One is the academic part, the second is the administrative part, and the third is the research part.
Okay.
And by academic part, I mean the students, etc., and the classrooms and the courses, etc. So we were the first IIM, once again, which took a decision very, very quickly to send students back home. And within a week after sending the students back home, when the pandemic started surging in our country, we managed to go online. We shifted completely online because we had the wherewithal, and some of our faculty also had the experience of teaching in the virtual mode. And thereafter, we very quickly went for actually training our faculty. So we had those faculty who were very good at the virtual training, at taking online classes, trained the rest of the faculty. We trained them into groups. We quickly decided upon a platform upon which we were going to work. We made sure that the faculty got acquainted to it. And at the same time, we also made sure that we realized that online teaching is not simply standing in front of a camera and doing exactly what you did in the classroom. Online teaching is a completely different pedagogical tool. And therefore, to make sure that the efficacy of the online education was there so far as the learning was concerned of the students, we went back to the courses, did the required modifications in the course outlines, in the pedagogical tools, in the content, in the kind of things that we were going to use. So for example, if there were some exercises, they were perhaps converted into case studies. There was some reading material which was given beforehand so the students were prepared. So we did all of this, but the most important thing is that we continued to learn. So for example, one of the things we learned during that while we managed to have a great infrastructure at our end, the students at their end did not have a great infrastructure because some of them lived in far-flung areas where bandwidth was an issue. In some places, even regular phone connectivity was an issue. And therefore, we had to address those issues as well. So very quickly, we created a learning management system where we would put the videos of the lecture so that the students could download and see them at an appropriate time whenever they had the bandwidth. And then we also started planning to actually bring back those students who had major issues. And again, I think we were one of the first institutions, perhaps in this country, if not the world, who got some of the students back during the times of the pandemic while taking precautions, etc. And if I were to tell you a lesson that we learned, and that is a lesson that we are now kind of trying to address, is that what we realized was that while we did all of these stackable things, so for example, IIM-Indore has now started the physical classroom as well as we have started the hybrid classroom, because our PGP numbers are such that we cannot accommodate them all in a classroom if we want to maintain the social distance, which we definitely do. So for me, security, safety, and health of my students comes before everything. So if we do the social distancing within the classroom, in that case, we cannot accommodate the entire class. So we'll have to necessarily work in the hybrid mode. So we got the equipment for that as well. But what we realized was that we did not have a well laid out digital strategic policy, a strategic digital policy. And I think that's what we are going to do, that instead of stacking up equipment by learning through our experiences, We will have a coherent digital strategy. And in line with that digital strategy, we are going to be better prepared for the future. So this is so far as academic part is concerned. And by the way, the academic part also had an assessment part, which was the most challenging, because we had to figure out an assessment tool which worked in the online mode, and an assessment tool which is also fair to everyone, because whenever we talk about online tools, they are subject to be misused, or rather they are more open to unfair means. And we wanted to make sure that whatever we do is fair. And therefore, choosing the right platform to create fair, equitable online exams was another challenge that we addressed, and we managed to do so very, very well. The key was constant communication, and the key was the unbelievable hard effort, strong effort, which was put in by my team. So the chairpersons of my programs, my deans, we all used to sit together, and we have probably literally burned the proverbial midnight oil to actually make some of those decisions. Our meetings have gone way beyond midnight, but we wanted to make sure that we do everything which was there in our capacity to make things better. So this is so far as the academic part is concerned. The second part was the administrative part. So you mentioned that we have a 193 acres of a beautiful campus, and which is located on a hill. Now, this kind of a campus with this kind of a landscape also poses some other challenges, particularly in terms of maintenance. So when the lockdown happened, we had about 80 students who had to stay back in the campus because this was their home. They did not have a home to go back to. But we also had 150 families which stayed in the campus. And I had only 10% of the support staff which was inside. The other 90% was outside, and we couldn't allow them to come back during the lockdown for almost 3 months. And therefore, administration was a huge challenge. And once again, I'm so delighted because this was almost like a new beginning and a new realization for all of us in the campus, that IIM-Indore came together as a community. So I sent a message out to the community saying that we need volunteers who can help us with the maintenance of the campus. So we divided our work into 5 categories. One was security. The second was gardening. The third was looking after the dog shelter. We run a proper dog shelter. The fourth was the mess, so taking care of the mess and serving food. And fifth was housekeeping, which was brooming and swapping and mopping the floors, etc., etc. And I'm so delighted that the entire community came together. The faculty, the officers, their spouses, their children, they came and they gave Shramdan in whatever way possible, of whatever time which was possible. And then we made very, very clear-cut, detailed SOPs about how people are going to actually behave, wearing of masks, maintaining the social distances, which were the places which were off limits, and who were the people who were allowed in, what were the conditions under which they were allowed in. For almost 3 months, we actually shut down the campus, but we made sure that all the supplies were coming in. So once again, there were several evenings or several nights when I would have to call up some of my friends or some of the people who I knew to make sure that the supply of milk, the supply of food items, etc., did not stop. So the administration once again came together, and with the support of the community, we managed to get things in place. And the third element was research. We also wanted to make sure that we are doing something in terms of understanding this pandemic better. So we undertook a lot of research projects around COVID-19. And in fact, one of the early projects which was taken by one of our faculty with some of his friends in the United States was to actually make a prediction about the number of cases that we were going to have and the shortfall in the number of hospital beds that we were going to have. And then we actually came down to the level of the states. Subsequently, we did some COVID study around this entire concept of collective anxiety. And that was a study that I did with a couple of my colleagues. And we looked at how collective anxiety can actually be addressed. And when we look at the results of the collective anxiety, we got to learn some lessons as well. So I very quickly strengthened up our system of counselors. So we made sure that counselors were available on phone to our students who were not on the campus. And at the same time, they were available to students 24 hours through online counseling. So we got those systems in place because what we realized was that some of the people were perhaps not paying so much attention to the other consequences of the lockdown, to the other consequences of the pandemic and the fear that it had brought into the minds of the people. So I think on each of these three fronts, all thanks to my team at IIM-Indore, faculty, staff, officers who worked day in, day out to make sure the campus functioned as close to normal as possible.
2020 and 21 academic year considered to be the worst affected thanks to COVID-19, and also most productive year thanks to the technology. Technology has played a significant role in higher education sector. How do you see the role of technology going forward for the higher education in the country?
See, rather, technology was always there. The only thing is that the adoption of technology was something that some of the people were resisting because they thought that we can perhaps live without it. But what has come to the fore is that we can't live without it. So I'll talk about 2-3 things, and do pardon me for being philosophical about a couple of things over here. So technology to me is an enabler. Technology to me will never replace the experience that one has in a classroom, that one has in a campus. And therefore, if I were to look at the bright side of technology, the bright side is that we have been able to actually very quickly turn around and make sure that the learning of my students was not impacted. And that's a very great thing about technology. The second great thing was that we managed to help other institutions. So one of the things that I've always maintained ever since I took this administrative role in the IIM, that as IIMs, as institutions of national importance, we need to handhold other institutions who do not have the wherewithal. So once again, the moment we had trained all our faculty, we started offering the faculty development programs for other institutions about how to teach online, because we had that knowledge and we wanted to share it with the rest of the institutions so that they were also not left behind. And there were so many people who are faculty trained, and I'm so glad that we were able to help those institutions. So once again, technology came to the aid. So it sounds a little weird when you say that an online class on how to teach online, but then that is what was required at that point of time. The third thing that technology did very, very positively was that it allowed us to reach to far more people in terms of pure numbers. So we were able to offer programs, we were able to actually talk to people who may otherwise not have found the time to. So we conducted a series of talks around how is the post-COVID industry going to look like in India. And we did that with one of the newspapers, an entire series of webinars. And the kind of people who we managed to bring in were not the kind of people who we would have managed to get together on a single platform were it not for the technology. So there were these great things that happened because of the technology. Even so far as the meetings of the deans around the world was concerned, we continued to do so, and that was made possible by the technology. We also became aware of the problems that technology faced, and I think that led to a lot of innovation because we were giving the feedback to the technology companies, to the platform, saying that, look, this is where we are finding a problem. This is where you can perhaps improve. And I think that ways academia has been able to contribute towards quick improvement of the technology. Now, this is the plus side of the technology. The other side of the technology, that the negative side of the technology is also something that we should not ignore. And that was the increased screen time. So my students, by my students, everybody, I think all of us, the screen time has increased to almost 2 or 3 times than what it used to be normally. And that's certainly not good for your health. That's certainly not good for your eyes. And that disturbs your sleep patterns as well. The second thing was that because you were online and because you were working from home, everybody assumed that you were available. So it didn't matter to them what time of the day it was. It didn't matter to them whether it was a weekend. And therefore, that entire distinction between home and work, that at some point of time faded. And I'm not too sure that's a very good thing. So for example, I know that there are certain organizations which have gone out and said that we are going to allow for certain job profiles work from home for life. And very quickly, the institutions of higher education have started talking about, okay, how can we make this better? How can we become an enabler? But I think we have to take a step back and ask this question, is that even desirable? Is working from home for life desirable? Does it make sense? And I'll tell you why it does not make sense to me. First of all, home is your sanctum sanctorum. Home is something that you come back to actually kind of, let go of the problems that you may have faced at work, etc., etc. Number one. Number two, work at home assumes that you have big enough homes, you have enough equipment in your house, you have enough bandwidth in your house, that if you have two people who are working, let's say if you have a partner who's also working, and let's say if you have kids who are also studying online, you have space for all of them, because clearly in a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom apartment, you can't have 4 people working. It's going to disturb each other. And therefore, without addressing those socioeconomic issues, I think the entire concept of work from home is inequitable. It does not treat everyone fairly. It does not treat everyone equally. So I think that is the other side of the technology and the other consequences and the ramifications of the technology that we need to look at rather.
A majority of universities in India have adopted technology, conducted online classes, and also examinations, and also validation of the answer papers. If I may know the experience of IIM-Indore, some of the practices that you follow for many years, can you explain?
So far as the exams are concerned, the one thing I think all the universities had to do, all the institutions had to do, including our own, is to actually relook at the assessment. I mean, fortunately, we at IIMs have always believed in continuous assessment. So our assessment is not through one single exam. It is through multiple modes. So you have exams, you have midterm exams, end-term exams, you have regular quizzes, you have take-home assignments, you have group assignments, you have individual assignments, you have presentations. And therefore, we used a combination of all of this. At the same time, what I realized was that early on, we decided to stick to the components as they were decided when we were in the physical classroom mode. So for example, if we decided that there would be 2 exams, and this would have a component of 30%, the other would have a component of 40%, and this is how the rest of it is going to go. What I realized was that perhaps taking too many exams and quizzes in the online mode was adding to the screen time and was also adding to the stress level of the students. So again, I requested my faculty to make sure that they are taking only one online exam. The second is we used to take a lot of quizzes which were unannounced. Now that became a little challenging because at times people had genuine connectivity issues. So they were not really prepared, or there were other kind of problems at their home. And this was a time when we needed to be compassionate without sacrificing the academic rigor. So I think there was this very fine line, balancing line, and I'm not sure whether we rode it with complete balance, but I can assure you that we tried our best, that we, without sacrificing academic rigor, how can we make sure that the assessments were in place? So we rejigged the assessments. We tried to see as to what were those components which were less amenable to actually inviting unfair means, and at the same time, which tested people, my students, for what they were expected to know. So I think it was a learning experience. We continue to learn. And as I told you, that when you choose a platform to conduct a proctored, artificial intelligence proctored exam, there was also a lot of training which was required to be given to our own academic associates. So the way IIMs conduct an exam is that our academic associates, they do a lot of things. So for example, looking at the class participation, looking at who's doing what, and then the proctorship in the online exam is also done by our academic associates, who look at the screen to a certain number of students, and if they find somebody is looking here or there, they kind of raise a red flag, etc. So training of those academic associates, almost 80 to 90 academic associates, that itself was a challenging exercise. And then obviously bringing them to the campus, making sure that they were present while the exams happened. So all of these were lessons in logistics. All of these were lessons in processes, and the feedback, therefore, that we gave to those platforms, I think helped improve those platforms. But I think most importantly, there were lessons on empathy and compassion that we got through these exercises.
how important is to have a digital policy for every education institution, especially for universities and higher education institutions, with following the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic?
I think it's an imperative now. I will not even get into the important mode. I don't think we can now categorize it as important, more important. We don't have a choice.
Okay.
We have to have a digital policy necessarily. Because one thing is very, very clear. While people are talking about this particular pandemic being a once in a century kind of an incident, no, the way we have abused the environment, the way we have gone about being completely oblivious of what we were doing to the planet, I'm not too sure if this is one of those freakish incidents that happens in a century. This pandemic is certainly not going to be the last one. And therefore, I think we have to be prepared for the future. And one of the things that the future does hold in terms of the kind of skill sets which were required, because in any case, remember whether this pandemic had happened or not, Radha, we were inexorably moving towards the post-fourth industrial revolution world, where some of the skill sets which are there today are going to become redundant. And a completely new set of skill sets are going to be required. And most of those skill sets include things like artificial intelligence, machine learning, analyzing big data, large copious amounts of data, so on and so forth. And to do all of that, we as educational institutions need to be prepared, not just to impart quality education and those skills which would be required, but also to reach out to a large part of the world. Because imagine if a lot of work is going to be taken over by machines and artificial intelligence, we will need to retrain a large part of the population of the world, which would otherwise be without jobs. And I think having a digital policy is the only way that we would be able to reach out to those people. I mean, my campus can hold only these many students. And I have to reach out to a large swath of population in my country to make sure that my youth is trained well. So that is one. And two, I think we are increasingly moving towards a world where there's going to be more democratization of education, which means we'll perhaps move into an auto-directed world where the participants are going to choose what they wish to learn, when they wish to learn, and how they wish to learn. And therefore, we should have that option available to them that, look, if you do not have the time to, but you need to reskill because it's important for the country, here is something that is going to come to your desktop. So while you work at your office, when you come back home, you can spend a couple of hours and make sure that you update your skills, which are going to be relevant for the country and this world tomorrow. And therefore, as I said right in the beginning, I don't think digital technology or digital policy is an option. It is something that we have to do. It's not whether we do it. We have to do it.
Going forward, as part of your strategic priorities, what is the roadmap?
Quite a few things. So one is that we want to make sure that we have, as I said, a digital strategy in place. Number two, what we want to make sure is that we have super smart classrooms which can replicate what happens in a physical classroom to the greatest extent possible. Number three, we also want to make sure that we do not allow the world to assume that they can go to things like work from home. As I said, I very, very personally, and I very, very strongly believe in this personally, that we need to look at these issues philosophically and from a socioeconomic perspective. From economic perspective, as I said, to me, it's inequitable. From a social perspective, I think it's undesirable. Because in some way, the social fabric will get damaged. I mean, look at what's happening to us. Because we lack human contact today. People have not met each other. And while one may say that, hey, we are doing these meetings and therefore we are talking more often, are we really communicating? I don't think so. And the whole point is that as human beings, we are supposed to use all our five senses, the sense of smell, the sense of feel, the sense of the eyes, everything, sense of hearing. And a couple of these senses do not even come into picture when you have something like this. And therefore, we have to make sure that we balance out the technological advancement and our preparedness for a future which is going to be technology enabled. Two, also making sure that the social fabric and this closeness that we have as human beings and the care that we have for the planet is also not compromised. So for me, the roadmap, particularly for IIM-Indore, would be that we get what we call the Group 8 project, the expansion of the campus in place with the state-of-the-art classrooms, while creating spaces where students can actually interact physically as well. So for example, we created something called the spiritual garden, so far as our campus is concerned. We created an outdoor gym in the times of COVID, simply because we wanted to make sure that those facilities which are not available, now you can't do gym online, right? And most of the houses, most of the homes that our students come from may not have the space for them to exercise. And therefore, I think the responsibility of the institution further increases in making sure how to balance the technological part versus the physical part. So the roadmap to me is very, very clear. Spruce up the technology, go digital, become state of the art, and at the same time, make sure that the human touch is not lost.
Any specific mandate is given to you as a national importance institution by Ministry of Education, Government of India?
I think one of the clear mandates is that we have to become bigger. We have to bring in more students. We have to reach out to as many students as possible. We have to come up with the programs which are blended, as well as we have to make sure that we are also doing some research which actually addresses the problems of the country. I mean, this is not something which has been mandated, but I think this is something that we take it upon ourselves. And therefore, increasingly, what we are pushing towards at IIM-Indore is to make sure that our faculty also picks up the research which our country needs to address those problems. And we are creating separate grants so far as that kind of research is concerned. So I think the expectation from IIMs is to help other institutions become better and to increase their own strength.
Finally, your views on National Education Policy 2020?
I think the national education policy has a lot of pluses. And I'll talk about, to me, what is important. To me, what is important is something that I have been an advocate of since very early, since the day I got into management education, and that is to have interdisciplinary programs, and not just interdisciplinary programs. I think that has to actually come down to our offering interdisciplinary courses as well. So for example, the course, I mean, apart from my regular course on negotiation, the two other courses that I taught one was called Leadership Through Literature. So where we picked up pieces of literature, and both from English and Sanskrit literature, and then by analyzing those, we tried to draw lessons on leadership. The other was a course called Justice, Ethics, and Morality, which drew from economics, which drew from management, which drew from psychology, which drew from philosophy, and which also drew from scriptures, because we were also talking about morality, etc. And we engaged in discussions over the issues that this country and the world is facing. So I think what NEP, by saying that there are going to be a lot of interdisciplinary things which are going to be brought in early on, provides students to actually pick up courses that will help them in having a well-rounded personality. So our own integrated program in management, if you look at the first 3 years, the undergrad part, it is actually derived from the model where we give them inputs on philosophy, political science, economics, statistics, theater, music, and languages. We've been doing this since 2011. The NEP has talked about it in 2020. So I would make this claim that we did it first, and we have seen that the students who are coming out of our IPM program, we give them a degree called BA in Foundations of Management. They are far well-rounded than students who come from a particular stream. So I think that to me is the biggest strength of the NEP. The second is the academic bank of credit that they have spoken about. That if at all you have completed, say, 2 years of your engineering and you realize that you want to do something else, then those 2 years don't go waste, but they're put into a bank. Of course, like any other thing, it should have an expiry date, because if you come back after 15 years, those 2 years would be completely meaningless. But in a given time frame, if you have those 2 years in the bank, you go try out something else, and then you come back and then you can straight away join in the third year. I think that's a brilliant thing which the national education policy, the new education policy, has actually brought in. So that was another very important part. The third part, which is extremely important, is that they are actually talking about promoting a lot of new ideas and blending technology with everything. So the national education policy actually talks about how the research is going to be supported, how research should be addressing the problems, how a separate research fund would be created, so on and so forth. And it's also talking about giving autonomy increasingly to the institutions who keep performing better. So these are some of the very, very strong pluses and the strengths of the new education policy. The only word of caution that I have is that there's many a slip between the cup and the lip. So many a times, plans that look good on paper, they eventually don't work simply because the implementation does not happen in the same spirit in which those plans were envisaged. So I think that is a word of caution. That is a word of caution that I would want to bring in, that in the spirit in which, be it the autonomy that we are talking about, in that case, autonomy has to be given in its entirety, saying that, all right, you're a great institution. Now you should run the institution as you wish to, rather than changing the mind later and saying, no, let me try and put controls over one thing or the other thing, or trying to dilute some of the other provisions of the national education policy, saying that, oh, this looks very difficult. If you have the will, a way will always come out. And I think if we all put our collective minds to it, then the wonderful aspects of new education policy will not be very difficult to implement. Long, yes, but not difficult.
Professor Himanshu Rai, thank you very much talking to ET Government.
My pleasure entirely.
And wonderful day ahead for you.
Yeah, you too.